Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are coming to us today. My name is Lisa Saragusa, and I want to welcome you to today's Care Connect session. Before we get into today's presentation, first thing I want to say, if you want to take off your camera and show us your smiling faces, we would be happy to see you. But if you want to stay closed behind camera, understand that as well. But please know that as this presentation does go on, please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions that you may have or raise your hand, and then we can call upon you. And then just one housekeeping note, just make sure that if you're not talking, you keep your microphone on mute. We are recording this session, so we just want to make sure that we have as minimal background noise as possible. So again, before we get going, I want to do a few more introductions of the CARE team, as well as our board members. So our executive director of CARE is Myrna Gran. She's actually on her way to Brandon today, doing some meetings with the PCCA today, or I think all weekend as well. Jordan Siswa is on our call today, and he is our marketing and industry relations manager. Diana Svensson is with us today, and she is our office administrator coordinator. I am Lisa Saragusa, and I take care of all training elements within CARE, as well as membership. So questions about any of those elements, feel free to reach out to any one of us. But also on our team, but not present today, is Tracy Shelton. She takes care of our communications. We do have a monthly newsletter that we do send out digitally. So if you're not on our list, please make sure you reach out to any one of us at the office so that we can add you to that distribution list. There's relevant industry information, upcoming events, regulatory information, and just good things to know about our ag industry. So if you're not on the list, get in contact so we can add you to that. Erin Krimble's not on the call today. She takes care of all of our accounting needs and things related to administratively like that. And Juliana Gran is a student who takes care of our database. So she would be the one that makes sure that your name is accurately on that list so that you get the relevant information. Not sure if we have any board members on our call today, but there is a list of our board members. So please, if you have any questions about CARE, who we are, where we're going, what information that you require from any of us, please reach out to any staff or board member, and we would be glad to help and answer your questions. And speaking about reaching out, if you don't know how to reach us, there's our contact information, as well as the social media channels that we are sitting on. So please make sure that you like, share any or all of our posts, and please engage with us. If you are on our call today and you are not a member, we obviously encourage you to become a member. The more that we have as members, then the stronger that our voice can be and the stronger that we can be as an industry. So if you're not a member, click on that QR code, take you to the membership page where you can get some additional information. Or again, reach out to us at the office and we'd be glad to help you out. So our Care Connect sessions, we started these Care Connect sessions last year as a way to, again, to get some relevant information out to our industry. And I don't want to say just members. These Care Connect sessions are free for anybody and everyone who would like to sit in and join. But again, it's relevant industry information for you. Lately, we've been having a lot of scientists from AAFC coming and talking to us about their research. This is a wonderful platform for them to get their information out, which is relevant for you to grow and to be better at the profession that you do. So we do have a lineup of Care Connect sessions all the way until the end of April. So if you want to find out some more topics that are coming up, there's the QR code that will take you not only to the list of upcoming events, but also all of our previously recorded Care Connect sessions. So you can review and listen into some of our past sessions if you didn't get a chance to come live. Next week, we have Michelle Hubbard's going to be talking about her research as well. So if you're interested in that topic, please by all means join us. All right, that being said, on to today's presentation. So for today's presentation, we have Megan Vankowski. Megan Vankowski is a field crop entomologist at AAFC Saskatoon Research and Development Center. Her research program focuses on the biology and the population ecology of insects, pests, and their natural enemies, and the goal of forming effective pest management programs. She is the chair of the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, a prairie-based entomologists who coordinate and conduct annual surveys of key insects, pests affecting cereals, oilseeds, and pulses. The network provides weekly updates as well as annual risk and distribution maps to farmers, agronomists, researchers, and agricultural stakeholders. Dr. Vankowski's research interest also includes invasive species, insect pests, vegetables, and biological controls. So with that all being said, I am now going to pass it over to Megan to enlighten us. Thank you, Megan. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll just pull up my slides here and then we can jump right in. So it's lovely to be here today and to be able to use this venue to speak to everyone about the entomology research that I do with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So hopefully you can see the slides now.
All good to go. Go right ahead, Megan.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lisa. So I joined Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in 2016, and since then, in my role as a field crop entomologist, I have largely been working on understanding insect population dynamics so that we can better understand the risk to our crops from insects between years and take better action to try to manage insect pests. And so I'd just like to start quickly with some contact information and resources. So my email address is here. I'm always happy to answer questions, to try to help identify insects that you're seeing in fields. Definitely feel free to get in touch. We also have our Prairie Pest Monitoring Network website. The link is here. It's prairiepest.ca. Pretty easy to Google usually. And I'll talk a little bit more about all of the resources that are available on the website as I work through my presentation today. I'd also just like to highlight the Saskatchewan Guide to Crop Protection, the Alberta Blue Book, and the Manitoba Guide to Field Crop Protection. And so something you'll note as I'm going through my presentation today is I'm not talking about the products or spray rates or anything like that. That is really outside of my area of expertise. Today, I'm going to be focused on the scouting aspect, but the information on what products are available to manage these insect pests is in these resources on this page. I'd also just like to highlight that the provincial websites from Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation and the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture and Manitoba Agriculture, they all have really great online resources as well that we often link to in the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network. So we have many great information resources available. But again, if there's anything that you want to ask, or if you have any specific questions that you think would be well answered by me, you can definitely feel free to get in touch. And if I can't answer the question, I might know someone who can, and I'm happy to send that along. So I'd like to jump right in now to the presentation itself. And I like to start here with this figure that really nicely highlights all of the different components of integrated pest management programs. And as the title on my slide says, the more information that we have, the more effective our pest management can be. And that's kind of one of the roles that our Prairie Pest Monitoring Network is meant to fill. And so I think it's very important that we have records and historical information that can help us frame and understand what the risks have been in the past and frame and plan what could be a risk in the future. And we can use that historical data that we get from our records to develop forecasting models or forecasting systems for some of the species that we're dealing with. When we have forecasts, then it's important to know if those forecasts are working. And it's, of course, important to know from year to year what the risk is in individual fields. And that's where monitoring comes in. So this is information collected in real time in the growing season that we then use to make decisions on how best to manage the pests that are present. And finally, all of this information, as well as the damage that the insects do over time, goes into creating or developing economic thresholds for these insects, which we don't have for everything I'm going to talk about today, but we do for a few. And so just again, information is really important. And all of these arrows are pointing to different ways that we can collect information that we can then use to improve pest management in the long term. So for my presentation today, I have two key objectives. I'm going to start by introducing everyone to the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network in case this is the first time you're hearing about it. And then for the bulk of my presentation, I'd like to talk more about some of the specific insects that we monitor, talk about their life history or their life cycles, the damage that they do, and then talk about the best management practices for scouting these insects. So to jump right in again, the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network has been around in Western Canada for nearly 30 years. It is a coordinated monitoring program that takes place across the Prairie region. So this is stretching from the BC Peace River region in northern British Columbia all the way through the agricultural extent of the prairies to eastern Manitoba. As a group, we are conducting annual surveys for insects in fields following standardized protocols, which means that we can compare data very easily between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, for example. Whereas in the past, every province was doing things a little bit differently. Now we do everything the same. We are mapping the results of these surveys to provide a snapshot of the annual distribution and abundance of each of the pest species that we're monitoring. And then we're using that historical data to develop models and to conduct research to better understand insect pest population dynamics, which can help us to forecast risk from year to year and within years, which is the last point on the slide here, where we're also then communicating this information during the growing season to the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network website and to subscribers to our website through our weekly updates. And I'll talk a little bit more as I go on about the content of those weekly update emails. We have a very huge team across the prairies, and it's not just Ag Canada that's doing this work. It's not just me. We coordinate and work very closely with the three provincial agricultural departments in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And then we have funders and cooperators from all of the different commissions and groups that are listed on the slide here, as well as farmers and agronomists who help us to collect information, whether this is volunteering sites that they are monitoring for us for some of these insects, or providing us with permission to go on to their fields to take samples so that we can monitor these insects across the region. So we work with all these partners to collect monitoring data on an annual basis. And then in my lab at Ag Canada, we're working on mapping the results and working on the forecasting and the weekly updates and things like that. So in 2025, we were actually able to get out to over 6,500 locations to collect data on the insect species that are listed here in the table. That's a very significant monitoring effort that we could not do alone. So that big list of people on the previous slide is really important to doing this work, and we couldn't do it again without the farmers and agronomists who are also helping us to collect this data. So that's the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, and I'll talk a little bit more about our resources and how to use some of them as I go through the next slides, which are going to focus more on the insects that we monitor and the information that we have about them. So I'm going to start with grasshoppers. Grasshoppers the pest grasshoppers are native to North America. Looking back in history, we've had several incidences of very high grasshopper population densities that have been very damaging to agriculture on the prairies. And so they're a very important group of pests that is a good place to start this discussion. There are 4 primary grasshopper species that are considered to be economic pests on the prairies. So these are the migratory grasshopper, which is pictured on top, and the 2-striped grasshopper, which is pictured below, which has 2 characteristic yellow stripes down the back, as well as Packard's grasshoppers and clearwing grasshoppers. But it's important to note that in Western Canada, we actually have about 80 or more species of grasshopper, and the vast majority of those 80 species are not considered to be economic pests. So one of the things that I like to mention is that there are a couple quick rules of thumb that you can use to approximate whether or not a specimen that you're looking at is a pest or not. And so those 3 things are, if you have adult grasshoppers with fully developed wings that you're seeing in a field early in the spring, say in April, May, or early June, those species are probably not pests because all of the pest grasshoppers overwinter as eggs. Grasshoppers that are very brightly colored don't tend to be economic pests. And grasshoppers that make noises while they're flying or while they're sitting on the ground are typically not pests as well. So if we think crickets or Carolina grasshoppers, the big ones that fly up and kind of look like butterflies as they fly and then just drop suddenly out of the air, species like those are not typically considered economic pests because they tend to prefer to feed on native grasses and not our crops, but also because their populations don't tend to explode the same way that we see the pest grasshopper species explode when we have drought conditions. So for the pest grasshoppers, we have 1 generation per year that is overwintered in the egg stage. The eggs hatch in the spring, and the eggs tend to be laid in the ditches, so we tend to see grasshopper activity start in the ditches and then move into the field crops. The nymphs develop through 5 instars, and then they molt to the adult stage, usually starting in mid-July. So again, if you're seeing adult grasshoppers in a field, definitely before mid-June, then that's very unlikely to be one of the pest species. Although in 2023, growing conditions were really good for grasshoppers and they were quite ahead of schedule, but that was definitely an odd year overall. For management of grasshoppers, it's quite important to be monitoring for them early and to be considering spraying, if necessary, during the nymph stages. And this is largely because as grasshoppers get older, they get bigger and they become more mobile. The young nymphs are smaller, which makes them a little bit easier to kill. It takes a little bit less active ingredient, but they're less mobile. They don't have wings. They don't have great big jumping legs. And so if you're going to target a life stage, nymphs are the better life stages to target than the adult life stage for sure, because adults are so mobile, they can just fly to the next field where a farmer maybe hasn't sprayed yet. So it's important to be ready to manage grasshoppers as early as you can. There are all kinds of, or the products that are registered are in those crop production guides that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. In terms of best practices for scouting, it's important to know what the regional trends have been. And you can find those from our website. If you go to the Prairie Pest homepage, there is a tab for risk maps. And on the page, there is a list of pest risk maps by species, and you can pick the grasshopper from the list. And if you scroll down, we have a bit of information about the grasshoppers themselves. And at the bottom or towards the bottom of that page, you can see this carousel of the historical maps. And so these are based on the surveys that we conduct every year in the fall, where we go out and we estimate grasshopper densities at almost 4,000 locations across the Prairie region. And the map then gets compiled, and the 2025 map looked like this. So on all of the maps that I'm going to show today, light green is low risk or low densities, and getting into red and orange and red is higher risk or higher pest densities. So in 2025, we definitely saw some areas like southeastern Alberta that had fairly high grasshopper densities in the ditches in the fall. And so that is a sign that those areas might be at risk in 2026. In terms of using this map as a forecast for the next year, it's important to consider not just the density that we saw late in summer and fall of the previous year, but also what the conditions were like for grasshoppers to lay eggs in the fall. So if we had a warm fall in 2025, which a lot of areas did, then that is prolonging the period where female grasshoppers can be laying eggs, and that can add to the potential for a population outbreak the next year. Spring weather is also important, where grasshoppers really like hot, dry conditions. And so if it's cool and wet in the spring, then that can help reduce the risk. Once the season gets underway, the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network uses some phenology models that we've developed to predict the staging of grasshopper development throughout the year using current year weather data. So a phenology model is a model that predicts the rate and the timing of development of a pest throughout the growing season. So phenology just is a word for development, and so these are models that predict development. And so in our weekly updates, we provide maps like the ones pictured here to give everyone who's subscribed or everyone visiting our website an idea of what we predict to be happening if there is a population in that location. So we don't know for sure that there is a grasshopper population at every single location in the prairies, but if there was one, these maps are predicting what stage we would expect to see in terms of grasshopper development. And then finally, if you're in a region with a lot of risk and it looks like, according to the phenology models, that grasshopper development has started, the eggs are hatching, first and second instars are present, then it's time to actually get out and scout. And to do that, we have a monitoring protocol on our website, and also information about thresholds, which are listed in the table here. And I won't dwell on these for very long because I have other insects I'd like to discuss in this presentation, but these are just some of the methods and the resources that we have on our website that can help to make these decisions and to time scouting activities the best we possibly can. So from grasshoppers, I'm going to transition to another pest of wheat that we deal with on the prairies, kind of work through the same information for this particular insect. So wheat midge are very tiny little orange flies as adults. They lay their eggs on developing wheat kernels, and some of the damaged kernels look like the pictures here with the blue background that was kindly provided to me by Shelley Barkley from Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation. So this insect can both decrease the quality of the wheat grains and the quantity of grains that are harvested. Like grasshoppers, wheat midge also has one generation per year, and this insect has a very tight synchrony with wheat development. So if the adults are active a little bit too early or a little bit too late, then the crop isn't necessarily at the right stage to allow larval development. And the adults are very short-lived, only 4 to 5 days. So it's really important that adults are emerging when the wheat is at the right stage to receive their eggs. Another very interesting thing about wheat midge is that they have a diapause stage that takes place in the soil over the winter. But if it doesn't rain enough in the spring, they can remain in that larval diapause, in that cocoon, for multiple years. In the literature, it says up to 11. So that makes forecasting this insect a little bit of a challenge because weather in the spring is so important. So in terms of best practices for monitoring, again, we can start by looking at the regional risk and historical trends. And the map that I've got on the slide here is showing our survey results from 2025. And so this is a survey that we do in current year wheat fields in fall of 2025 in this case, We collect soil cores and then count the number of viable wheat midge larval cocoons in the soil. And we anticipate that those viable cocoons will be adults the next year in areas where it's wet enough in the spring. So if it's not wet, then the risk for wheat midge infestation goes down. And if it is wet, the risk goes up. For wheat midge, one of the best ways to manage wheat midge and prevent damage is to plant a midge-tolerant wheat variety. And so in areas with high risk or high numbers in 2025, like around just south of Regina, those are areas where farmers might want to consider planting a wheat midge tolerant variety. So we have this idea of what's gone on historically. We know what the major factors are that can affect the population during the growing season, being rainfall. And then again, we can go to our Prairie Pest Monitoring Network weekly updates and those phenology models where we're again going to track the development or what the development is that we would expect based on weather so far. So in spring of 2026, we're going to start running these models with weather data from 2026 for across the prairies, and that will allow us to predict how the larvae are developing through the soil once they're reaching the pupal stage, and that gives us warnings that we can be prepared to scout for the adult wheat midge in late June and early July. In terms of scouting, again, we have a protocol on our website, but when you're scouting for adult wheat midge, you have to go out around dusk on calm, warm days and watch for those little orange flies flying around the wheat heads. There are economic thresholds, which are in the protocols, where to prevent yield loss, the threshold is 1 midge per 4 to 5 wheat heads. And if you want to protect against quality loss, it's 1 midge per 8 to 10 wheat heads. And again, there are some insecticides that are registered. Those are in those crop protection guides, as well as information on how to apply them to protect natural enemies. And I'll talk a little bit more about those right at the end of my talk. So I have 2 more insects I'd like to quickly go through in terms of scouting and management. So I'll move to an oilseed pest now. This is cabbage seed pod weevil. So this is a fairly small adult insect as well, easy enough to see in a sweep net sample, so bigger than a midge, but still fairly small for a beetle. And they lay their eggs into developing canola pods, and you can see a picture of a larvae here that's pretty late instar. It's almost ready to pupate, but those larvae feed on developing seeds inside the pods, leading to yield losses. This insect also overwinters in the adult stage and then emerges in the spring. And so we can actually start monitoring for it a little bit preemptively by sweeping brassica weeds in ditches like flicksweed or volunteer canola to see if adults are in the area. And then once the crop is starting to flower, they're going to disperse into canola or mustard crops. So again, in terms of some best management or best practices for scouting, we can look at the regional and historical trends for risk. Again, on the website, we have historical maps for distribution and abundance going back to the mid 90s for this species. And then you need to go or plan to go to monitor the fields when the canola is starting to flower. And this is a monitoring program that's based on sweep net samples. Count the number of weevils in the sweeps to determine if the field is at threshold or not. And if it's not at threshold, then take no action. But if you're above threshold, then you can consider different insecticide management approaches. And again, the protocol to monitor is on our website in much more information than I can delve into right now. And then the final insect I'd just like to talk about for a few minutes is diamondback moth. So this is an interesting case. It's a little bit different than the other species I've talked about today. It has a very worldwide distribution, and it is known to develop insecticide resistance very quickly, which makes it an important pest and sometimes much more challenging to manage. It doesn't really overwinter well in Western Canada. It's too cold. So it disperses into the prairie region from the United States and Mexico in the spring. This insect, unlike the others that I talked about so far today, can have multiple generations per year. So we start at the adult stage that migrates into Western Canada. They lay eggs. The eggs hatch into the larvae that are only about a centimeter long when they're ready to pupate in panel C. And then they pupate and emerge as adults, and the cycle starts again. And they can do an awful lot of damage to canola and mustard plants. The picture here is from our colony in the lab. So of course it's very high pest pressure, which has basically just eaten everything that they possibly can off of that canola plant. But we can see some very significant damage in the field as well, in part because this species can have 3 to 5 generations on the prairies, depending on what the summer weather conditions are. So the warmer the weather is, the faster the life cycle is, or the shorter the life cycle is. And we can see more and more generations per year as the life cycle takes less time, which can lead to very quick population growth. And so again, on our website, we post these really great maps that tell us how many generations we're expecting to see as of certain dates based on the weather. And if you think back to 2023, it was really hot and dry across the prairies, and we were definitely seeing 4 generations and predicting up to 5 generations of diamondback moth. And so again, the more generations, the more moths and the more damage we could see in the field. 2025 was quite a different story. It was cooler, it was a bit wetter in some places, and we were only expecting to see 3 generations in total. So the risk was less in 2025. For scouting, we start the season quite early in April and into early May by putting up a network of pheromone traps across the prairie region. And so these are agronomists volunteering, farmers who are volunteering to host these traps, and they report back to us on a weekly basis if they're catching diamondback moth in these traps or not. And then Alberta does something really cool where they have this live map on their website with every point on that map being where a diamondback moth trap is located. And every week it gets updated with how many moths they're catching. And then the little points on the map change color as more moths are caught. So again, they start out at green with very low numbers. And then as they catch more and more, if in these fields, if they do catch the moths, then they'll start to see some yellow or maybe some red dots on that map. And those are areas where there's higher regional risk. And that is a sign to maybe go out and scout in your fields if you're in that general area, because the risk in your region is possibly growing. So we start with these pheromone traps in our network, and then we have our weekly updates to give an idea of how many generations could be happening based on the weather so far. And then if there is a risk in your area, it's important to go out and scout for the larvae. And we do this by pulling plants and counting larvae on the plants. So at flower, the economic threshold in canola is 100 to 150 larvae per meter square. So it's about 1 plant. So if you pull one nice healthy plant at flower, knock all the larvae off. If there's a lot of them, then that's maybe approaching that economic threshold. So to wrap up for the different insects that we scout and monitor for as a network across the prairies, I'd just like to show the maps from 2025 for a few other insects, but I'm not going to go into all the scouting details for these. I just don't have time and I don't want to bore anybody. But we do monitor for Bertha armyworm. We do this using pheromone traps, similar to the diamondback moth, where cooperators, farmers, agronomists, researchers host these traps for us and count the number of Bertha armyworm caught. So in 2025, we saw some higher densities of Bertha armyworm in Saskatchewan and a few patchy places in Alberta and Manitoba where management was needed. But overall, the population densities were generally low, which leads to lower risk in 2025. But in 2026, I think it's going to be important for people to be watching our spring monitoring program. We start this program in June, and then that again gives people an idea of the potential risk in their region. And if there's risk in your region, then that's when you want to start thinking about going out and scouting your fields. We do a harvest survey for wheat stem sawfly in southern Alberta every year. We did see a few areas with fairly high levels of damage in the fields at harvest in 2025. And if it's kind of following a drought trend into 2026, we could expect to see some risk of wheat stem sawfly damage in southern Alberta again in 2026. And then the final insect that I'll just touch on quickly is the pea-leaf weevil. This is also an invasive species to Western Canada. The adults damage the foliage of the plants. They make these little U-shaped notches along the margins of the leaves. And then the larvae develop in the soil by feeding on the root nodules. So you can have some yield loss, both from the adults feeding on the leaves and mostly though from the larvae that are feeding on the root nodules. And so we've been monitoring this insect since it showed up on the prairies based on the damage that it's doing. And in 2025, areas with the most damage were kind of the Edmonton area and the Lethbridge areas in Alberta, as well as a few fields in the Grand Prairie area that had quite high densities as well at harvest. And then you can see all of the red in western Manitoba there and eastern Saskatchewan. So those are some of the areas that we would potentially expect to see higher numbers of pea-leaf weevil in 2026. So to just finally quickly wrap up, and this is a lot of very insect-heavy information. I hope you're still with me. There are a lot of different beneficial insects in our field crops. And one of the reasons that we're scouting for insects and using economic thresholds in making decisions for management is to help to protect these beneficial insects that provide ecosystem services to our farms. And so the species that we should be interested in are things like bees that provide pollination services, as well as a number of different fly species, beetles and rove spiders, true bugs that are predators of other insects, and then parasitoids that are quite host specific and tend to target only one or two of our pest species. And so in the picture here under parasitism, that is a very teeny tiny little parasitoid wasp called Macroglenus penetrans that is a parasitoid of wheat midge. So it's very important. It helps to reduce wheat midge risk on the prairies. And it's important for us to be aware of it and to take precautions to protect these parasitoids when we're managing wheat midge. So I'm just going to kind of end my talk quickly on some best practices to protect beneficial insects. And those include applying insecticides according to label instructions if economic thresholds are exceeded, providing places of refuge where we're not applying insecticides, where these insects can hang out and be safe, and providing alternative resources, because a lot of these species, like the parasitoids and the pollinators, they like flowers and they can get some food and some resources from flowers. There's also, in the last few years, been a push to add more information to the crop protection guides on how to protect beneficial insects. So I would also refer you to those resources, as well as the Field Heroes website and our Ag Canada Field Guide, which is available for free on our Prairie Pest Monitoring Network website, which can also provide some good information on how to protect beneficial insects. So to wrap up what I talked about today, proactive scouting for insect pests can help ensure that we're protecting our crops, protecting beneficial insects, and making the right decisions for our farms. We have all kinds of resources available to help time those scouting activities and protocols that have been developed that match up with our economic thresholds so that it's as easy as possible for all of us to use those protocols to go to the fields and determine if pests have reached those thresholds or not. Timely scouting, using those thresholds, and following label instructions will all help to conserve populations of beneficial insects. And so in addition to using these things that I've talked about today, if anyone is at all interested in hosting traps for some of these insects, or helping us to get permission to get into fields, or if you're a farmer and you'd like to give us permission, please feel free to get in touch. I think it's really important. It's information that we can provide as timely as we can, and we can use your help. And definitely feel free to get in touch with me if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what we do and how we do it. And I'd just like to wrap up by thanking all of our farmer and agronomist volunteers who allow us into their fields and help us to monitor for these different insects across the prairies, everyone in my lab and at the provinces who are participating, and of course all of the funders who support not only the insect monitoring that we do, but also the research that we do to improve pest management on the prairies. And that's it for me. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Megan. Yeah, it's important to note again that, you know, things don't happen. Your research doesn't happen all on its own. It isn't without the funding, as well as the people in the front lines who are important in providing you with the necessary information. So yeah, I love the fact that have that offer that you put out there if people are wanting to host traps or that give you permission to enter onto their fields to gather that data. It just makes the ag industry and a little bit more relevant, and the more information we have that you have, I'm sure the better the research can be. There are a couple of questions. There's one that is sitting in the Q&A right now, and I have one from somebody who had, when they registered, to ask the question. But before I ask that, I did want to open the floor to see if there's anybody on the call right now that wanted to ask any questions of Megan before I jump into the other questions that I do have. Can unmute your mic and just speak away, or raise your hand and we can call upon you. But if not, then I will ask the first question. Says, to control grasshoppers, which nymphals instars is the most susceptible? Why not to target egg stage, which is immobile?
Those are both really great questions. So to start, in terms of the nymphal instars, I'd have to go back and look at the research to give the best answer, but my instinct is if you can be targeting first, second, or third instar, those are going to still be the easiest to kill. I hate to say it. I hate saying easiest to kill. I love insects, but grasshoppers are one of the nastier ones for us. But the earlier you can target, the better. When we start to get into the fourth and fifth instars, those are bigger again. Their jumping legs are more developed, so it can be a little bit easier for them to get away. Still better to target fourth and fifth than it is to target adults if you can. But again, the early nymph instars are going to be easiest. And then with respect to why not targeting the eggs, the problem is that the eggs are buried in the soil. So grasshopper females in the fall, they like to pick kind of sunny, sandy conditions, usually in ditches or field edges. So they're not always, or they prefer those ditch areas and are less likely to lay eggs in the field. So that also complicates managing them. But the eggs are buried, and the eggs are inside egg pods, and that also protects the eggs from chemicals and mechanical damage and weather. So the eggs are actually quite well fortified and protected. So it's, again, better to look for the nymphs hopping around. The other thing is eggs can be laid quite patchily, and they're just difficult to know. It's difficult to know where they are. So again, it's better to watch for active nymphs hopping around and aim to manage those.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll pause for a minute to see if there are, not a minute, but I'll pause. Jordan, anything from your end? Nothing? Okay. All right, then I will go to the next question. That was a question that was provided to us during the registration process. And it says, how can some of these management strategies and tools, such as forecasting and monitoring, account for variability from farm to farm?
Yeah.
How are economic thresholds adjusted for rising input costs and current market conditions? Another two-parter there.
Yes. And so I think to help answer the first question, on-farm variability is huge, right? The scale that we farm at, we definitely recognize that there's a lot of variability on farm, just as there's a lot of variability across the Prairie region. And so in what I'm talking about today is definitely looking at things more from a regional scale. And what is that regional risk? What is the risk in my RM or my county based on the surveys that we're able to do? We by no means are indicating that that risk is going to be the same for all of the farms in that county or in that RM. So just because your neighbors or you had really high numbers doesn't mean that it's the same right down the road. And we do recognize that. And so what we're hoping our network can do is to provide that snapshot of what that regional risk is to make things a little bit easier to time and make decisions for what you're going to scout for on the farm. So there's no really perfect answer that can account for variability. Scouting is absolutely going to be the best thing to know exactly what's happening in a specific field. And one thing that I didn't talk much about, I just kind of referred to the protocols, but our protocols are all asking that you take samples from multiple locations in a field, not just from one or two, because again, that's how we get a picture of what's happening across the whole field and use that to make a decision. So I hope that kind of helps answer the question. We recognize there's tons of variability. We're hoping that the tools that we're providing can help to kind of cut through some of that and provide some information so that we can time the scouting activities the best we can. Because summer's busy, it's crazy. You're not just managing insect pests, but weeds and diseases as well, and weather and everything else. So hopefully that can help. With respect to the economic thresholds, some of the thresholds that I talked about and some of the and some that I didn't today are really true economic thresholds that are based on the cost of the inputs and the projected benefit from selling your crop, right? So Bertha armyworm is an example of that. If you look at our protocol, there's a table there that you're going to use to based on the number of larvae that you're observing in the field, the cost of the control product, and the anticipated rate that you're going to sell the crop at. You can put all that into an equation and that will tell you should you manage or not, right? So that's a true economic threshold. Most of the thresholds I talked about today are more nominal thresholds where we know that we start to see yield loss accrue if we have more than X number of insects per plant or per meter squared. So unfortunately, those aren't developed to the point yet where we do take those economic questions into account, but for some species we do. And definitely we see that the tipping point to make those decisions changes a lot based on what the cost of control is and what the value of the crop is for those cases. So.
Okay. Perfect, thank you. Any other questions from the people on the call today? Jordan, anything from your side there?
I definitely overloaded with tons of information. I'm sure it's a lot to take in and to process. Scouting is important. There are protocols on how to do it on our website and all kinds of other resources, like I said.
Yeah, and I do like the fact that the resources that are available for people to gain the knowledge or find out what's happening. Those the mapping as well, I'm sure, is extremely important. I also liked how you talked about there's those insects that we don't want or that do damage to our crops, but interesting how you also there are insects out there that are needed. They have some beneficial factors to the crops that are out there. So as much as we want to manage those that are doing damage, we have to make sure that we're protecting not harming the ones that are beneficial to our crops as well.
Yeah, for sure. I do see that there was another question from Jatinder. How often should the pheromone traps be changed for diamondback moth? That's a really good question. I believe it's every 6 to 8 weeks we change the lures and the traps because the lures, the pheromone lures become less effective over time. I'd have to double check those numbers. It's in our protocols. So we typically run the diamondback moth pheromone trap program for about 6 to 8 weeks. We do run it a little bit longer in Saskatchewan, and that definitely requires that we change the pheromone lures. But the traps themselves are being checked weekly for the counts that then goes into the Alberta website that I showed and into our Prairie Pest Monitoring Network weekly updates and Saskatchewan, Manitoba update on a weekly basis as well.
Perfect. Thanks for catching that one. I did overlook that one.
It was hidden as a comment. So
I see that now.
I was
searching around. I was like, where? I did not see it, but now I do see it. Thank you. Any other questions from the people on the call today? Jordan, anything that's come in? I know sometimes you get, but it's quiet on your end too.
Yeah, I was like, this is all silent on the Western Front. I didn't even get I didn't even get my typical one from a like
from the typical people. No, that's fair. And I guess if there are no other questions, I'm happy to give people an extra 5 or 7 minutes back of their day. But yeah, Megan, wonderful information. And I love that we're able to provide this platform for the researchers to convey what they're doing that's beneficial for our industry. And happy to know that there's been avenues where people can continue to reach out to you with information as well. So any parting thoughts, or again, anybody else there that has any thoughts or questions that they want to ask?
Well, I'll just reiterate that I do love getting questions from anyone about insects. I don't know everything about every insect. There's way too many of those for that, but I'm pretty easy to reach, and I do try to be responsive. So please definitely feel free to shoot me an email if you have a question that you just don't want to ask today, or if you need to kind of think about some of the things I talked about and give it time, but you have questions a week from now, definitely feel free to send an email. I'm very happy to do my best to answer them or point you in their direction of the experts who can. So
perfect. Appreciate that. Yeah, I know quite often is like you end a webinar or call, it's like, dang it, I forgot to ask that one, or something comes up. So I appreciate that.
For sure. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'm going to pause, do this long pregnant pause. Any other questions before we wrap up? I'm not seeing anything. So again, Megan, I do want to thank you for this valuable information. Recording will be available, and I'll send that out to those who are on the call and or who registered. But for those who want to know, all of our recordings are on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. So please feel free to review this or any of our other Care Connect sessions. So again, thanks everybody for attending, and have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you.